If you're enjoying the Heath Geeks Book Club podcast, we'd appreciate if you hit the subscribe button, leave a like, rating, or review, whichever your preferred podcatcher platform allows.
This edition of our podcast is brought to you by 360 Health and Well Balanced Nutrition.
Welcome to the Heath Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
Hey, Eleanor. You want to talk about the good life some more?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Let's do it. So I was thinking how, as a mom, right, we feel it's important to research childhood development.
Oh, yes, we must.
And we read these books about how to raise kids and
then we can carry a lot of guilt
yes.
later in life.
Mom guilt.
Yes.
It's real. And not even in later in life. It's all the time. But anyway, we have all this access to this information now about how to raise good, happy kids. But what I think is neat about this body of work and the book, The Good Life by Robert Waldinger and Marc Schultz, is that they focus on adult development, right? Like it is not so much as in our childhood is important and impactful, but it is not the end story for us. It doesn't matter what neighborhood we grew up in.
It's never too late.
It's never too late to work on our happiness or our social fitness, so to speak. And that was really hopeful and uplifting to me. I liked that message in this.
I did too, and he gave us the reason he says this is because the data from these longitudinal studies that have been going on forever show us it's possible. And they give you outtakes, and the actual verbatim quotes these people made. They don't change them. Mm-hmm. And they even show you the inventories, the questions that they asked these people. And I thought that was kind of fun too. But yeah, that's a really hopeful message that we are adaptable and we do have control.
And in a research with millennials, they asked them, what do you think will make you happy? Like, what do you want in your life? And a lot of them said to be rich. Mm-hmm. And then the second most answer was to be famous. So what we think might make us happy, will it really make us happy?
No.
Well, there were a couple of charts. I said there were no charts in this book, but there actually were just a couple of charts. And one of them was over a lifetime and assessing the low points and high points of your life. Mm-hmm. And this one fellow that looked like he was I think in the Harvard batch. And he looked like he had the brightest future in front of him. And he worked and worked and worked. And his relationships were not attended to. And he had multiple marriages. And he ends up alone at the end of his life and not happy. And it was an unfortunate outcome because it could have been a very different story. And that is one of the things that they tell us, that if they could, they would love to have gone back 84 years and given this person the news they found. And he could have directed his life in a very different way.
Right. But the next best thing is to write this book so we can learn. There was something in here we wanted to share, the slicing up the happiness pie. Mm-hmm. So researchers looked at people who won the lottery. And 1 year after winning the lottery, those lucky lottery winners are indistinguishable from the rest of us when it comes to happiness. So, hey, millennials out there.
Does that have to do with the set point of happiness?
Yes. Tell us more about that.
Well, it's kind of I've heard of set points in diet.
Right, like the set point weight theory, where your body just has this weight and it's going to try to fight to be at that set point.
And we have set points in other physiological things like your core temperature and your bloodstream pH and things like that operate around set points. So is happiness, does it have a set point? Where is the happiness organ? There isn't one. But the idea that you win the lottery, that brings you a boost of happiness, and then all of a sudden it fades and you come back down to where you were before on your happiness scale. And that's what they're talking about.
It's not lasting.
Yeah, and that if you have a devastating thing that takes you into the bottom of the darkness, you do return. to the happiness. I mean, it's possible to return. The set point will bring you back up to your happiness set point.
So what we think will make us happy or make us really sad, it won't last forever.
Right.
And we'll come back. And then also they point out that this data, they used it to estimate that our intentional activity counts for a lot when it comes to happiness. Our actions and the choices we make account for about 40% of our happiness. That's a sizable chunk that's still within our control, so very hopeful.
So I'm going to decide to be happy. And if I smile, I might actually be a little happier.
Right, but how, like, there's a lot of applicable tools that you can use in here or actions you can take beyond just, like, deciding I'm going to be happy. Like, for instance, they had people go out riding a bus, and one group was supposed to just sit to themselves, which would have totally been me. I'm guilty, right? Like, I'm just going to sit here, and if I don't make eye contact with anybody, I don't have to talk. I just social anxiety, you know? But they had the other group talk
Intentionally.
to someone.
They had to.
They were told, you need to start conversation with strangers on this bus. And that group didn't necessarily think that they would be happy with that, but they were happier than the group that did not talk to anybody. So, like, those are the little actions you can take. Like, I'm not just going to decide to be happy today. I'm going to make a point to do things that I know are going to make me happier.
Yeah, and that's the same thing on airplanes. You know, when you go on an airplane in the airport, a lot of people just thump into themselves.
Yeah.
But, so you can find places to do that, can't you?
Yeah, but I feel the resistance in my body now.
Well, when my kids were little, I can remember going into stores and always talking to the clerks and asking them how they were. And my kids would say, "Stop it, Mom, stop it, Mom. They don't care. They don't want to know." I'm going, "Yeah, they do." I'm going to be nice.
Yeah, but all those
but it made them
interactions
uncomfortable
make a difference.
to see me being so forward going. And I think that wisdom, the ancient wisdom that I talked about in the last episode, that the fella said, the more you give, the greater your abundance. And I do think that idea of coming out of ourselves and going to look at others' needs or others' situation, we've read about that in other books too. Looking out rather than in becomes a better option. That if we're always so self-centered and worried or
reserved,
and picking apart everything we're doing, we'll get over that and just go do something with someone else. And they talk about the power of friendships over the life, and that's what I was saying. When you're in high school like these boys were, the friendships you have there may not last forever, but boy, are they critical while you're there. And your lives go different ways, and you may never see these people again, but should you, it's funny how you just pick it right back up,
Yes.
So that idea of the power of friendships through your life. But yes, this experiment of getting on the bus, I liked hearing about that. Yeah,
that's encouraging. Well, you mentioned like the adolescence. I liked the lifetime of adult relationships, a mini roadmap that he has on page 62, and he kind of goes through how adolescence, he calls walking the tightrope from 12 to 19, right? You have a different perspective in life. And then young adulthood, you're weaving your own safety net. And what else? After, was it midlife, 41 to 65, you're stepping beyond the self. And then late life, 66 and up, minding what and who matters. So that was a really neat section in the book, just reminding us that our perspectives will change depending on what phase in life we're in. And it's neat because we got to, like you said earlier, we got to learn these stories in each of their
lives.
Lives and phases of them too, and how their perspectives and happiness changed and what they thought would happen.
Yeah, and this study, since it went on so long, has a second generation. So you have the children reflecting on the
their parents.
Yes, and talking about how their relationship with their parent was, and it really is insightful.
It is. You got to read it. It gives me chills thinking about it.
Yeah. The central thing here is your relationships are critical to your happiness and your health. And so that's what this book is about, relationships and good relationships. And he's talking about on time and off time relationships and development. Some of us are like late bloomers You know, we don't. There's an example of a young man in here who was so busy working and making money, he was never able to develop intimate relationships. It came in his 40s, which is sort of off time, right? Most people will be doing that in their late teens and 20s. But because of his life circumstance, and he went into the Navy and all sorts of things, you know, it was during the war years. So it just got off time is what these authors called it. And I found that a very interesting way to look at this, that some of us expect that we should be married by we're 20, and we're not. And it's frustrating. It makes us unhappy because we're not like everybody else.
Right. And
whereas if we could relax a little bit and say, we're just an off-time person, that may or may come later or whatever.
Right. It just speaks to the social pressure and expectations that whether it's your culture that you're brought up in or just your own internal, like, we got to stop. I think we're doing better. Mm-hmm. There's some people that are doing better with that. We're open to...
Society is moving a little bit.
Right. Open to not... You don't have to be married and have this many kids by this age.
Exactly. And making this much money.
Yeah.
Right. And you have to keep your job forever. You know, change is allowed, which is something he talks about here. The good life requires growth and change. This change is not an automatic process that occurs as we age. What we experience and what we endure and what we do all affect the trajectory of growth. Relationships are a central player in the growth process. Other people challenge and enrich us, and new relationships come with new expectations, new troubles, new hills to climb, and often we're not ready. You know, when we were presented with the change, we're not ready for it. But that's it. We should not run away from that. That's critical because that's where we're going to grow. You know, that's where the relationship is going to grow, and we're going to change. And that's how we change. If we don't get those new experiences, new relationships, new troubles, it won't happen. We'll be stagnant.
Right. We have to embrace the uncomfortable challenges, and he gives us some tools to overcome some of the challenges that we might face.
Yeah, but becoming a new parent, who's ever ready to become a new parent?
No one.
Exactly. So, you know, there you are. You got to
even
embrace
if you have one child, are you ready for that second one? Are you ready for it? No. I mean, we just do it.
Yeah.
You just have to jump in, yeah.
Well, if you're going to be successful and happy.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and that's the point. If you can't, you fall apart and you're unhappy. All right, so I like that. I thought timing is important, you know, when you experience those things.
So what about Wiser? He gives us
another tool. Yeah.
It's called Watch. Well, it stands for Watch, Interpret, Select, Engage, and Reflect. So these two gentlemen are practicing psychologists, if I'm correct there. So they're...
Psychiatrist and,
Yeah, so I think they're working with patients in addition to this.
Mm-hmm.
So this was very therapy-like, right? Just reacting to emotional challenging situations and relationship events, right? Like we said, things are going to be uncomfortable, and to build a healthy relationship doesn't necessarily mean that it's perfect or you're always going to agree on everything. Like the happiest couples that they had in here weren't necessarily free of arguments or free of disagreements, but they could rely on each other in the end. I think that's what they said was the measure of quality. So he gives us this Wiser model to try to think through these communications or potential conflicts that come up in your relationship.
Yeah, he had an example of two sisters, and one of them had a daughter, and the daughter wanted to go out in skimpy clothes and drink and do things, and so the sister or the aunt sort of inserts herself and says what ought to be done, and it caused a little rift, in two people's...
Do that sound again. That was cool.
Rift in two people's relationships with that aunt.
Right.
And that was the example of how to apply this. It's like you could just say, oh, shut up and go back home. You don't have anything to do with... I'm raising my daughter. Go, just get it. That was an immediate response. And they're saying, if you can train yourself to watch and say, why am I feeling angry towards her for saying that? Maybe she's got something going on in her life that's causing her to want to direct my life instead of her own. I mean, there are all sorts of things that happen to people we're not aware of, and they act it out in funny ways, but how we react to it. So that's stopping ourselves and just saying, why is that making me angry? And then that idea of, should I interpret that? How do I want to interpret that?
Well, the watch part, you know what that reminded me
What?
of? The fly on the wall technique from the book Chatter we read a couple podcasts back.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, if you're just a fly on the wall, you can watch what's going on. You can change your perspective. Ask yourself some of these questions like he has in the book. Did I take time to get an accurate assessment of the situation? Did I talk with the people involved? Did I consult others? You're like a fly on the wall revisiting the situation to make sure.
Yeah. I would say, am I hungry? Because if I'm hungry, I might have heard that differently.
Sorry for what I said when I was angry.
Yeah.
Hungry and angry.
Yeah.
So, the interpret is how willing you are to acknowledge your role in the situation. How are you overly focused on your emotions? So that's another way to really just step back and see how things are playing out. And then once you do that, then you can select.
That's the one I keep forgetting. Oh, I have choices? Oh, okay.
I can make the choice.
Yeah, that would be a novel idea.
And then engage is the last one. Did I practice my response or run it by a trusted confidant? Did I take steps that are realistic for me? Did I evaluate progress? Yeah,
that mom that was struggling with her sister's uninvited expertise and direction, it sort of thought, maybe I don't need to talk to her. I'll pull her off to the side later and say, hey, when you said that, I heard this, and it made me feel this way. Is that what you meant?
Right.
Get that clarification. And a lot of times that is such a hard thing to do for people. But if you can turn yourself around and say, I'm going to try it, kind of the results can be amazing. It's like, I don't need to be angry at this person. I had no clue, And
you feel so much better after you have those hard conversations.
You do, but that can be an avoidance factor there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that they're talking about in here is that then you need to reflect after it's all over. It's like, how'd that go for me? Maybe I didn't do that the way I meant to, but next time I'll tweak that a little bit. Right.
If you're really working on your social fitness, and I think that's a really big part of it, is reflecting on your interactions. Yeah. And your role you had in it.
They did admit in here, okay, we know this is lengthy, this wiser thing. It looks like it takes 10 minutes to do, or 15. You don't have that kind of time when you're talking to people. Your brain is really fast. It's going to do something, your behaviors. And so they say if you are practicing this and kind of get the framework in your head, you're more likely than not the next time to say, oh, I don't have to do what I always do and get mad at her.
Right.
Yeah, in that situation.
Speaking of Chatter, another tool that kind of brought me to that is in Chatter, they have you, what did they call it? Like a board of directors for who you can talk about with your chatter. There's a similar tool in here on page 107, the sources of support in my life, and has you list your relationships and whether they kind of satisfy all these different needs. So they have safety and security as one need, learning and growth, emotional closeness and confiding, identity, affirmation, and shared experience, romantic intimacy, help, both info and practical, and then fun and relaxations. So that's a really cool audit tool to see like where your relationships are falling and if you have a variety to meet those needs.
If you have a good support network. Yeah, and then he flips the coin and says, how am I supporting those people?
Yes.
So, it's a two-way street. They're helping me, but how am I supporting them? And I thought that was cool.
Absolutely.
To assess that, because a lot of times we're pretty self-serving and don't help other people, which is back to the ancients, they say that's a good thing to do to get yourself closer to happiness. Did you see the part in there about the family matters where they're taking some more tools or some ideas of what you can do is you can tune in to the difficulty, just notice it, tune into it. It's similar to the watch thing. But then you're also supposed to look for positive events. Don't look for all the negative stuff. Flip your switch to say that, and can I catch somebody doing some good behaviors? And we've run into this before, but they endorse it. They pull that in and say, this is a good idea. And when you're catching those good behaviors, that keeps you in the positive framework of your mind instead of the negative. You're getting more positive and more positive. And then the idea to remain open, always remain open to the possibility that you're not catching exactly what's going on.
Right.
You know?
Be curious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's such a good point too, right? Because it's the negative bias we have to look out for all the bad things that we might need to fix.
Evolutionarily.
Or worry about. Right.
Yeah, we're wired for that.
But then somebody who does a good job at something, that just goes missed, right? We're like, oh, they should be doing a good job, so we don't notice it.
So I want to tell Tim what a great job he has done with our podcast production. We have really, really appreciated that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tim.
What brought that on?
Could be the good life.
Looking for the
Well,
good.
thank you.
You do a great job.
But we could be so busy talking here that we would fail to notice that he's sitting here and doing all these wonderful things for us, and we're going to be happier now that we've said that.
Exactly.
And I'm happy that you said
Oh,
it.
good, good.
There you go.
Do you have any other things you want to help our listeners with from this book? Because I have one that's going to tie us to another book we're going to read. We're going to, at some point, talk about this book named Touch. And in there was a quote from Ogden Nash, who many of you are probably familiar with him. But he said, as our authors of The Good Life say, happiness is your relationships, right? And what they're saying here, Ogden Nash says, happiness is a scratch for every itch.
Right.
And they did not mention that in this book.
Nice.
But it's profound. Our relationships are profound, and we should invest in them. We should cherish them. We should not ignore them. They say take time to reach out to people and let them know how valuable they are to you. And that's always a good thing to do.
Absolutely. Should we play the clip from Robert Waldinger about, what they did find in this longest study ever?
Mm-hmm.
We've generated on these lives. Well, the lessons aren't about wealth or fame or working harder and harder. The clearest message that we get from this 75-year study is this: good relationships keep us happier and healthier, period.
I hope that inspires y'all to work on your social fitness and go buy this book from the Health Geek podcast website, because if you need a good, uplifting summer read, this is it. And I know some of you listeners aren't the most avid readers and you want something that's entertaining. Well, I'll tell you, this is entertaining, and I think it'll just make you happier reading it. So,
Yeah, and I think you'll come away with some really good ideas for your own journey towards happiness.
yes.
So I'm Eleanor at 360health4u.com. If you're interested in supplementation, dietary nutritional supplementation, reach out. I'll help you do an assessment, and then we can go from there.
Awesome. And I am Kristen Norton, one of the 3 registered dietitians of Well Balanced Nutrition, where we offer nutrition and wellness coaching online. Please visit us at wellbalancednutrition.com. We have lots of great resources there, and you can also apply for a free clarity call if you're interested in nutrition coaching and want to see what that might be like. All right, that's a wrap.
Happy reading.
Have a good life.
The views and opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the express written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.